Hi everyone, thanks for joining our webinar today. I'd first like to pay my respects to the traditional owners of the land in which I am working from, which is the Whadjuk Noongar people. We've got people dialing in from all over the countryside. So I'd also like to acknowledge that this was and always will be Aboriginal land and that sovereignty was never ceded. I'm Alia Hutchison. I'm the Shareholder Engagement Officer at ACCR. Our shareholder community plays a crucial role in helping us challenge some of Australia's biggest emitting companies. 2023 is shaping up to be a big year at ACCR, so we wanted to kick it off by bringing you all together to talk about the work that we do and answer some of the questions that you might have. This format will be a panel discussion. We've got ACCR's Executive Director, that's Brynn. Brynn, give us a wave. And we've got our Climate Lead, Harriet and myself. Before we open up to questions from the group, just know that you can submit them through the Q&A button down the bottom of your window, and we'll kick off shortly. So before we do head to the panel, I'll just tell you guys a little bit about myself. So I'm an Indigenous woman from Western Australia. I've got connections to Wonga, Sanadju and Mirning traditional language groups. Before coming to work at ACCR, I was actually working for a big mining company in the native title space and working with Indigenous land rangers, helping to uplift their programs and whatnot. And as much as I did love that kind of work, I just felt like you're being a cog in the big machine that's those mining companies, you're really not having the impact that I would have loved to have. So by luck, I kind of landed in a role at ACCR May last year, and I'm absolutely loving it. The guys in this company having such a big impact in the work that we do. They're an amazing bunch of people, and it's been really great getting to know some of you guys that have signed up with us. I'm the face behind the emails that you might have received. You may get our We Are ACCR newsletter. A lot of work goes into that from all of the team. Any questions you might email in and you get a response, they usually come from me. And yeah, we appreciate you guys jumping on board, because without all of you, none of the work that we do would be possible. All right, I'll kick over to Brynn, our Executive Director. Brynn, can I start by asking you what inspires you the most about working at ACCR?
Thanks, Ainsley, and hello, everyone. Joining from Jerrinja country on the south coast of New South Wales. Alia, I think I just called you Ainsley. Sorry, I am going totally mad. That was, anyway, great start, Brynn. One of the greatest things that inspires me is the people that I work with. I mean, as Alia said, we just have such an incredible team, and shareholder community. The people on this call, the people who put their money where their values are, and really work with us, or where their values aren't maybe, and work with us to change companies. I think one of the pitfalls of climate advocacy is that it's pretty easy to become focused on the bleakness of the crisis that we're facing. It's easy to get swallowed up in the enormity of the challenge and the overwhelm of climate change. But every year that I do this work, you have to fight that urge, and the reality is that change is possible, and we are seeing it happen. We are making progress, and shareholder advocacy is one of the key tools, the most powerful tools to make a difference. And it's a tool that shareholders can access, and it's a tool that everyday people can access in order to make major institutional shareholders think about accessing it. So rapid decarbonisation of the global economy is absolutely essential, and every fraction of a degree counts. Every coal-fired power station that is brought to an early close counts. Every gas pipeline that is prevented from going into the ground, or whose lifetime is reduced, counts. Every prevented drill site counts. We really are, we are so close to the end of our carbon budget that the work that we do to bring those dates forward, or to prevent fossil fuels developments going ahead, is really meaningful work. Momentum for decarbonisation is building. Over the last 12 months, we have seen an enormous shift in the investor mindset. We have had much more inbound institutional investor interest in the work that we're doing, in the programs that we're running, and in the opportunities that we're presenting to major institutional investors to use the tools that they have as shareholders to decarbonise the companies that they have invested in. And I guess we are getting to a point of alignment where investors are recognising that the strategies that we're putting up to decarbonise the companies in their portfolio, not only good for the planet, but they are reinforcing of long-term shareholder returns across their portfolio. So it's a really interesting time where those things have come much closer together, I guess, Alia, than they were 6 years ago when I started in this role. Just want to give you one example of a really incredible win over the last 12 months that has resulted in roughly 200 million tonnes of carbon that is not going to be emitted into the atmosphere so far, or projected, but the plan so far. And that is the incredible shareholder action that's been done over a couple of years, but culminating at the end of last year in the renewal of AGL's board with a slate of climate competent directors nominated by Grok Ventures, Mike Cannon-Brookes' private investment vehicle. So that campaign, ACCR has been engaging with AGL for many years. In 2021, we got a majority shareholder vote against management on a resolution that we put calling for the company, which was at that stage going to demerge into two separate entities, calling for both of those companies to set Paris-aligned targets. The company said they weren't going to do it. The shareholders said through that formal vote, you should do it. The company ignored that shareholder request, and ultimately the demerger rather, was withdrawn. Then an incredible campaign was run by Grok Ventures to see the election of those 4 climate competent directors. Now there is on the AGL board a balance of power where there is climate competence that is going to be making the decisions at Australia's largest emitter. So these are actions that have happened in part because of the sustained engagement of communities like this one. And so that's what inspires me, this community, that long-term presence, and my colleagues like Harriet, who know when the time is right to go very, very hard.
Thanks, Brynn. Another question, how exactly can the average shareholder have meaningful influence over the climate position or activities of a large Australian company?
So ACCR is essentially a club for small shareholders, for minority shareholders who have, small holdings or maybe larger holdings, but holdings of some kind, and it can be very small, in major listed companies, and who see the connection between responsible company behaviour and long-term value in their portfolio. So ACCR is also a small shareholder in major companies. We hold major diversified miners, oil and gas companies, steel makers, utilities. We're extremely motivated along with our shareholder community to change them. So in addition to voting at AGMs, which is a right that all shareholders have, or attending AGMs, there is a right that can only be enjoyed collectively by shareholders. So that is the right to file and co-file shareholder resolutions. And really, when I say ACCR is a club for small shareholders to get together and do things, this is the thing that we do together. So 100 shareholders, or shareholders holding 5% of a company, but generally our shareholders hold far less than 5%. So 100 shareholders standing together can have an item put on the agenda for discussion and a vote at a listed company's AGM. And it is this tool that has resulted in so much incredible transformation in the Australian corporate landscape. So that really is how minor shareholders can make change.
Thanks, Brynn. Our next question, we did have a question pop up in the chat which kind of relates to the next one I'm going to ask you. So for a lot of people, ethical investing is important, and rather than holding shares, they might consider divesting. What would you say to those who are uncomfortable about holding shares in some of these higher emitting companies?
It's a question we get all the time. And if the only data point you had on me was my own personal share portfolio, you would not think I was a climate activist. It's fair to say. But look, at an individual level, I would never challenge the way that people live their values through their finances. At a collective level, again, these rights can only be accessed collectively. So if you're an individual out there and you're not comfortable sort of making money off major fossil fuels investments, but you are interested in changing companies, then I encourage you to the entry point is just a minimum parcel of shares, a small shareholding that allows you to participate in this club. But at an institutional level, I think that conversation between divestment and engagement or escalation with companies becomes more complex. So for institutional investors like super funds, ACCR believes that from a climate perspective, so from an emissions reduction perspective, divestment should be an absolute tool of last resort. There's no evidence that divestment by major institutional shareholders results in real world emissions reductions. And in some cases, it has been shown that divestment at an asset level by major companies of heavy polluting assets to perhaps even more unethical parties has resulted in net emissions increases. So the tools that we use and that we access can only be used and accessed by those around the table, by the owners of the company, by the shareholders in the company. So we are unashamedly, I guess, an engagement and escalation machine. We're not a divestment campaigning group. And the AGL outcome, for example, was delivered by the actual shareholders of company rather than parties that had divested from that company.
Thanks, Brynn. Just before we throw over to Harriet, just a reminder, if you do have any questions for Brynn or brought up some of our answers, just pop your questions down in the Q&A and we'll come back and address them at the end of the webinar. All right, Harriet, over to you. Can you tell me a bit about your role and what inspires you?
Thanks, Alia. Thanks everyone for joining us today. I'm dialing in from Yuin country on the south coast, a little bit further south from where Brynn is. I joined ACCR 2 years ago, and my title, or my role, is company strategy lead. So I provide a sort of support and oversight role for our very clever team of company strategy leads who are setting and implementing the plans that we have to shift the emissions profiles of the target companies that we're focused on. I was drawn to work with ACCR. I guess it was a time, it was pre-election. I'd been through a lot of sort of soul searching myself and was really, as Brynn alluded to, definitely, think action is the antidote to despair when it comes to climate change. And I really like that the tools that we use are sort of independent of the political process as well. I mean, there's interactions with policy, but we can create change without having to wait for governments to get it together and to set Paris-aligned policy for our country. Instead, we can make demands of some of the most carbon-intensive companies to set Paris-aligned strategies today. I also really love a David and Goliath battle. We're coming up against some of the most, powerful industries and companies in this country that have consolidated power over many decades. We're a pretty plucky band of individuals, and supported by the likes of our shareholders community, we're just able to really, influence and command the attention of the executive and board of these very influential companies through the deployment of some clever strategies and tactics.
Thanks, Harriet. Could you run us through some recent examples of how shareholder resolutions have contributed to real-world outcomes?
Thank you, Alia. Brynn's done a pretty comprehensive job of the AGL campaign, so I won't emphasise, go through that too much. I do want to say before going into specifics that just having the capacity to file and for companies to know that we have the capacity to file really shifts the dynamic. It means that when we get in touch with companies, they're immediately willing to meet with us, sit across from the table from us, engage with us, and often we can negotiate or put pressure on companies without going to the lengths of actually filing a shareholder resolution, just because they know that we can whack them with that stick if we decide to. Then there can be scenarios where we file a shareholder resolution and then we negotiate an outcome with a company, and so we can withdraw that resolution prior to the AGM and it never goes to a vote. A really good example of that is what happened with Rio Tinto last year. we've had a long-standing focus on Rio Tinto's membership of industry lobby groups that have a very toxic influence on Australian climate policy. And we filed a resolution with the company seeking that it suspend membership of some of those industry associations. Rio really wanted to avoid having that contest, having that discussion at its AGM. So we managed to sit down with their CEO of Australian operations and their global CEO and negotiated that they exit one of those industry associations, being the Queensland Resources Council, prior to the AGM. So in that scenario, there wasn't even a vote, there wasn't even fanfare at the AGM because we got the impact that we were looking for prior. An example where a resolution has gone to a vote and achieved real world outcomes is with Origin Energy. In 2021, we filed a resolution with Origin asking that the company align its allocation of capital expenditure to a 1.5 degree Paris-aligned pathway. We were particularly concerned with the significant sums of money that Origin was spending on its exploration activities in the Beetaloo and the Canning and the Cooper and Eromanga basins. That resolution, much to the surprise of the Origin board, achieved support of 44%, which is a significant number of shareholders to support that proposal. And then we saw this year Origin made a major announcement that it was withdrawing from those exploration activities and released what we deem to be a Paris-aligned transition plan for the company. There's since been a privatisation offer of the company. There's a few things up in the air there that one could argue that actually the potential for the transition and that transition plan enhanced the attractiveness of Origin for that takeover offer. I think that's two pretty pertinent examples, and combined with AGL, I hope we've armed you with enough here.
Thanks, Harriet. All right, back to you, Brynn. One of the areas that's receiving increased attention is the focus on directors and remuneration. Why is this important, and do you need shareholders to support your campaigning on these votes?
Thank you, Alia. One of my, favourite forward-looking topics. So AGL is the example of board renewal over climate concerns. 4 directors were nominated by Grok Ventures. All of them were elected. They were elected on a platform of more rapid decarbonisation than the previous company board was prepared to implement. And really, it is logical and appropriate, and the structure of the corporations law makes it very clear that the ultimate responsibility for company strategy, overseeing strategy development, sits with the board, and strategy execution sits with the CEO or the managing director of the company that is, of course, appointed by the board of directors. So it's really important, and the law says that ultimate accountability sits at board level. So this is why we are ultimately, that's where all campaigns lead to, I think. If you can't achieve change, if shareholders if shareholders are ignored by company boards when they've used other tactics, and we've been using shareholder resolutions for quite a long time. Some companies we've achieved change, at some companies we haven't. So where those shareholder concerns have been ignored over a period of time, I think it's just an extension of action for shareholders to look very closely at the composition of company boards. The problem with the boards of many major emitting companies, and particularly pure play fossil fuels companies, so companies that only extract coal, oil and gas and sell it to be burned. That's the primary or sometimes only activity that those companies do. The problem with those boards is that is all they know how to do quite often, that you will have 8 or 9 or 12 people, most of whom, the vast majority of whom, have a background in oil and gas extraction and markets. So there is a problem with groupthink on company boards. There is a problem with a lack of diversity, both of background and of experience and of mindset. And so we do think that this will be an increased focus. We also know that a bunch of institutional investors out there have started to put voting on directors into their policy positions, their internal policy positions. So we are prepared for that kind of escalation. So it's already happened once in Australia. It happened as well with the Exxon board a couple of years ago in the United States. And we are anticipating that that is where these conversations will go. When it comes to remuneration, so the amounts that executives within the company are paid, we often see really perverse incentives. We still have, for example, in the Australian economy, a number of companies whose executives are incentivised to go out and look for more oil and gas when the International Energy Agency says that new oil and gas will take us beyond our carbon budget. There is no room for new oil and gas. There's no room for new fossil fuels. But yet the CEO of Santos, one of Australia's largest oil and gas producers, for example, has a financial incentive to pursue those growth projects. So he's not incentivised to reduce emissions, for example. He's not incentivised to ensure that the rights of First Nations people on whose land he does business are properly respected. But he is incentivised to go out and to pursue those growth projects. So in Australia, that remuneration is a really powerful tool. So two strikes, so 2 consecutive votes against the remuneration report prepared by the directors and presented at the AGM to the shareholders, of more than 25% that go against the report, that sets the board up for a spill where all of the positions are essentially declared vacant. Everyone has to stand for re-election. Other directors can be nominated. That certainly hasn't happened in Australia, certainly not on climate grounds, but it is a potentially very, very powerful tool. So these are all tactics and I guess escalation strategies that we need our community's support on. I know we have been in contact with you over the last couple of weeks to telegraph some of the strategies that we are putting into play over the next couple of months in the first half AGM season. I can't comment more on any developments on those strategies tonight, but we really are expecting a very bold and a very big 6 months. So we are absolutely delighted to have those of you already along for the ride with us, and we would be delighted to welcome new shareholders into our community as well.
Thanks, Brynn. We'll throw back to Harriet for our last question before we go through some technicalities of how you can actually sign up with us. So Harriet, can I get you to talk about other strategies we use, and in particular why we sometimes might choose not to file a shareholder resolution with companies we're engaging with?
Yeah, so when we're devising our company-specific strategies, there's a multitude of factors we take into account and different levers that we're contemplating. ACCR was initially founded as a vehicle to file shareholder resolutions within this country. So it has been the key escalation tactic that has been pursued over the last decade. But sort of as Brynn was alluding to with regards to the director elections and remuneration votes at AGMs, sometimes shareholder resolutions are not enough to move the dial with certain recalcitrant companies and their boards. And in that scenario, there is another mechanism available to us in the Corporations Act where we can file a statement against those votes that will be tabled at an AGM. And for that statement to articulate the grounds for our concern around the conduct of the board or the structure of the remuneration scheme, and that can be printed in what is the notice of meeting, so that the agenda for the AGM. Increasingly, we are going to be looking to file these statements or members' statements against those key management votes for certain target companies. And like shareholder resolutions, we need our shareholder community's support to be able to file those member statements. So we certainly don't want our community to think that because we're sort of, for some companies, taking our eyes off a focus on shareholder proposals, that you don't still have a key role to play to support with our strategy. There can be, I'll just flag, we're also looking at different sort of legal strategies that are available, through our rights as shareholders, and also as consumers. And you may be familiar with the proceedings that we have filed in the federal court against Santos, in which we allege that the company has engaged in misleading and deceptive conduct through its claims that the gas it produces is clean, and that it has a clear and credible pathway to achieve net zero carbon emissions by 2040. Those proceedings were brought forward by the sort of analysis and monitoring that we undertake of the companies that we focus on, and the concerns that we developed around some of the, those claims that Santos was making. We expect those proceedings to progress this year, and encourage everybody to monitor the public, media commentary around that. Just to conclude, it is a pretty dynamic process. The setting of strategies, we often know the outcome that we want, but sometimes the tactics or sometimes the exact approach, is very changeable. It's subject to negotiations with the company. It's subject to the actions of other parties. There's a whole host of factors that feed into how we finally land with a company. And so that can lead to scenarios where we signal to our shareholder community an intention to proceed with a filing strategy, and then subsequently changing our minds and electing not to. I want to impress upon you all that we don't do that lightheartedly, but we always have to maintain that sort of flexibility in our strategy implementation process, to protect our reputation, but also just to ensure that we can continue to maximise the impact that we're having. Where we can, if we make an elect to not proceed with filing in certain circumstances, we will communicate with you guys as much as we can about the rationale. Often there are scenarios where we can't sort of disclose all the juicy details.
Thanks, Harriet. Before we jump into our Q&A at the end of this webinar, I'll just show you, I'll run you through our Shareholder Hub, which is where you can sign up with us. If you're already signed up, you can log in, update your shareholding details and whatnot. So just give me a second and I will share my screen. Okay, so this is our Shareholder Hub, hub.accr.org.au. If you haven't signed up with us previously, this is where you can do so. Just hit the Join Now button. Pretty straightforward. Details, Alia, Hutchison, that will do. Okay, so when you come to this page, this is where you'll pop in any of your shares that you hold. You'll put in your shareholding entity details. So whether they're under yourself, they might be you and your partner, or a company you're a director of. So we'll just Alia Hutchison shares. This postal address section is quite important, that it matches what is held on the share registry. When it comes to filing resolutions, the companies that we file with will go through and check all of the people that have signed up with us. If your details don't match exactly, so if you have if you've updated your address on the share registrar and you've got your old address with us in these details here, that is grounds for the company to potentially strike you off the resolution. As Brynn mentioned earlier, we need a minimum of 100 people to sign onto a resolution for it to be able to be tabled at the AGM. So this is important that you do put your correct address in. For the purposes of this, we will put in a dummy address. Your HIN number can be found on any official documentation that you might have, such as your dividend statement. You should have one HIN for your shareholding entity. I know some people have emailed in before saying that they've got a different HIN for all of the different companies they hold shares in. That's a different identifier number. So your HIN, it should be just one same number for your shareholdings. Then down in this part, this is where you add the companies that you're holding shares in. So for example, we could go, let's say BHP, AGL was another one we talked about. You might hold shares in companies that aren't on this list. This isn't an exhaustive list of every single company on the ASX. What's on here is ones that we've historically engaged with, maybe likely to engage with. That's not to say that if something's not on this list, it might not be added on there at a later date. So don't stress if you hold shares in other companies and they're not on that list, that's fine. And then down the bottom, once you've added the companies that you hold shares in, this is where you hit save and sign the agency agreement. This one's quite important as well, because without this document in place, we're not able to act on your behalf as an agent to file the resolution. So the agency agreement looks pretty technical. Essentially, it's the document that allows you to participate in a shareholder resolution. So hit agree to that one, save. You should get an email confirmation that shows you've signed up with us. Continue. Here's all your details, double check that they're correct, hit submit. So once you've done that, if you go back to our hub page, if you buy more shares or you've sold some shares or any of your details have changed, you can jump on and hit update your details. This will bring, if you're not already logged in, you'll just put in your email address and you'll be sent a link to log in. If you don't get the link, just double check your spam folders, all that sort of stuff, just to make sure that it hasn't got automatically filtered. So if you come into this page, this will have an overview of your shareholdings, your details. Click on your details, that's where you can update. You shouldn't have to update your name unless your surnames change, obviously. Shareholding entity and companies held. This is the section where you update your shares. So say my shareholding entity is Alia Hutchison shares. If I've bought or sold some shares, I can go, all right, I no longer hold AGL or BHP, but now I hold Domino's Pizza because we all love a good pizza. Incitec Pivot, insurance. So that section's where you keep those up to date. If you do make any changes, you will need to save and sign the agency agreement because this ensures that all the details in here are matching the new details that you've updated in your profile. Save, and then you should be emailed a PDF copy of the agency agreement as well. I'll go through a couple of our frequently asked questions. I did touch on a few things that come up as I was going through that process. We talked about what the agency agreement is. A question that comes in quite often is, does ACCR act as your proxy? We don't, and we do. You are able to, and we encourage you to vote as you see fit on resolutions at AGMs. From time to time, we might provide some guidance around what we think is recommended voting, and we'll always provide some background as to sort of how we've come to those conclusions. We won't always do this. I know people have emailed in asking if we can give some advice around voting on certain things, but again, it just comes down to where our team's been able to do some research and sort of really have some solid reasons to back up why we'd recommend those votes. Are there any financial obligations for entering into the agency agreement? No, there's no cost at all. You just jump on and sign up with us. There's no tax administration, no tax liability consequences at all. So nothing in there that you need to worry about. Another one that comes up quite often is how many shares do you need to hold? This one's twofold really. In order to participate in a resolution, you only need to hold one share in a company. However, the ASX stipulates that when you're buying shares in a company for the first time, the minimum parcel is generally $500. So if you're looking to buy some shares to support us for a resolution, the minimum amount will be $500. And obviously, so one share is equal to one vote. So the more shares that you hold in a company, the more votes you're allocated as well. I think that covers most of our FAQs, unless Harriet and Brynn have got a couple that they want to throw at me. We'll jump into the Q&A from you guys. So Brynn, I've got one for you, I think. How do you engage superannuation funds to represent their CSR objectives to ASX companies? Do they pay you to represent them?
So great question. To the last point, no, absolutely not. We're totally philanthropically funded. So if there's philanthropists joining into the call, love to hear from you. But yeah, we are funded by individuals and foundations is how we pay our team salaries and do the things that we do. How we engage with super funds, really, the primary power that we have is the power of ideas. So we aim to put up the best ideas, the best strategies that help super funds and other investors live out the values and the commitments that they make to their members and their clients. So if a superannuation fund is saying that they care about climate change and they aim to engage with the companies in their portfolio to decarbonise them, well, we say to them, here is the strategy to actually do that. So we're identifying, developing and presenting those opportunities to institutional investors. So really the power that we have is just in relation to ideas and to research and analysis. and then the tools, the logistical tools, the shareholder community that we bring to the table that can facilitate their active escalation with the companies in their portfolio. I would say, though, that members of superannuation funds in particular do have powers in relation to their fund. And I think one of the most powerful demands or powerful asks that a superannuation fund member can make of their fund is the demand to show the evidence of the fruits of their engagement with companies in their portfolio. Ask them what exactly their conversations have led to, what shareholder resolutions they've supported, what directors, the climate incompetent directors, they have voted against. Really, that's what members can do. And of course, we have those conversations with superannuation funds too, but it is far more powerful coming from a fund member than from us.
Thanks, Brynn. We've got a question from Vera, thank you. It says, you mentioned, I might throw this one to Harriet. Brynn, feel free to jump in if you've got anything you'd like to add as well. The question is, you mentioned that divestment should be the last resort for institutional investors, but what about fossil fuel companies that are expanding? At this point, shouldn't expansion be a clear red line for financial institutions, or should they first engage with expanding companies, and for how long?
Yeah, I mean, expansion is a red line for us as well. It is completely unacceptable for fossil fuel companies to be progressing with aggressive expansion agendas at this critical juncture for our carbon budget. I guess, as Brynn explained earlier, though, there's not a lot of evidence that if progressive, climate-aware investors exit those companies, that they're going to have any tangible impact on those expansion strategies. Whereas if they remain in those companies and deploy the tools that are at their disposal, ideally in collaboration with the likes of ACCR, we can actually, prosecute a case to change that board and to change the strategy of that company and to stop that expansion agenda. If you don't have a seat at the table and you want to exit those companies and just wait for governments to roll out global fossil fuel non-proliferation treaties, you might end up waiting a long time.
Thanks, Harriet. I think we've got another question in here. The question was in regard to how do you keep abreast of the work that we're doing? Some people might hold shares through a financial advisor or the likes. So the question is around how do we keep those people abreast of the work that we're doing? Do we talk with the financial advisors or that sort of along those lines? So probably my best suggestion for this one, if you want to keep on top of directly the work that we're doing, if you sign up to our contact list, I'll just share my screen again. So on our main website here, accr.org.au, the bottom of the page, we've got contact us, subscribe for email updates. That'll put you on our mailing list. We've just recently started sending out bi-monthly e-newsletters that sort of really provide an overview of what we've got upcoming, companies that we're looking to engage with, and some wins that we may have had in the past or in the last 2 months prior. You can also follow us on our social media pages if you like. And then if you have any questions or specific things that you want to hear about, you can contact us directly. If you email myself at shareholders@accr.org.au, then any questions that you have, we can answer directly. How can members of big super funds like UniSuper best support ACCR's strategy with companies like Santos?
I have a sneaky suspicion that UniSuper has decreased a fair chunk of its holding in Santos and Woodside, but regardless, I guess there's a lot of pressure on the likes of UniSuper to divest its holdings from Santos and from Woodside. I guess what we would encourage is to push the fund to provide greater evidence of how its continued holding of that company is justified considering its statements with regard to climate change, and to push for far greater evidence of the engagement that it is undertaking with the company and the strategies that it is deploying within that engagement. And in scenarios where perhaps it's voted against things like the transition plan, which Santos held a vote at its AGM last year where there was a vote on its proposed climate transition plan. 37% of shareholders voted against that plan, which is again a significant vote. I would be surprised if UniSuper, if they held, didn't vote against the plan. So it's really about agitating to say, what next? What are you going to do to hold this company to account? Because it clearly has not adjusted its strategy in response to the actions you're taking thus far.
Thanks, Harriet. I'm just conscious we're running close to time, so we've got 2 more open questions in the chat. I'll just throw them both out there, and we'll have that last call on questions. So we've got, does ACCR work alone or work with groups like Greenpeace, ACF, or legal like EDO, etc.? And another question, is it possible for ACCR to engage with companies like Glencore, Xstrata, big emitters, which are not listed in Australia? Or is your scope limited to Australian listed companies?
It's a very timely question, Julie, because we have just filed a shareholder resolution with Glencore with a coalition of institutional shareholders. It was no mean feat. The company does not make it easy through their structure. But yes, there will be a vote at Glencore's AGM this year, with the ask of that resolution being for the company to provide, to disclose how its coal expansion plans align with its stated commitment and claims of having a 1.5 coal wind down strategy. And just quickly on the what was the question about collaboration with others? We're in dialogue with a whole host of different actors out there who are focused on the same companies that we are focused on. So yeah, we have relationships with a number of different organisations, but I guess not many of them deploy the tools and the strategies that are specific to the rights of shareholders. And then the question on the EDO. So the EDO is acting for us in our proceedings against Santos in the federal court. So yes, we are definitely working with the EDO.
Thanks, Harriet. That brings us to the end of our time. So I'd just again like to thank everyone who jumped on board and participated today. If you've got any further questions, you can flick me an email, shareholders@accr.org.au. Jump online our website if you like. You can sign up to the mailing list there. And yeah, reach out and look forward to having hopefully some of you sign up with us or talking more. Thanks, guys.